as a lead content designer. So I have a total of 11 years experience in education, and currently I'm working on a magazine called as Enquiry, okay, so which is aiming to inculcate scientific temper in children. So currently I'm in the process of building my own organization, so I'm calling the children's magazine as Enquiry, right? And the theme of today's talk, the theme of today's event, AI in education, is something that's very close to me, something that I have been thinking about since at least a couple of years, something that I currently also work with in my area, right? Like in whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm building today, I also work with AI, right? And it raises a lot of questions, definitely. So I'm here to talk about AI in education, but before I get there, I would like to take a pause. I would like to go back a little bit. What I'm going to talk about might sound like I'm diverting away from the topic, but stay with me. I'm going to connect it back to how it is relevant to AI in education. So the story starts around a couple of months ago when I was driving on the highway. I was going home. My hometown is Warangal, so I was on the highway, and I was listening to this book called The Book of Laughter and Forgetting. So it's written by Milan Kundera, so he's a French novelist. I did not finish the book because I got stuck in the first chapter, and I never got time to again read the book. So if you're wondering how was I reading the book while I was actually driving, I was listening to it. It was on Audible. So I was listening to the book. So there was this quote in the book that said, I would like to just refer to my notes so that I don't mess up the quote. So it says, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. I would like to repeat that. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. As I was driving, I just skipped back again and again and again. I think I would have skipped at least, I would have gone backwards at least 50 to 20 times just to understand what this meant. I couldn't catch it. And I was a little agitated because the line sounded so simple, but I just couldn't grasp the meaning of it. After listening to it for around 15-20 times, I made some sense of it in my own way before I proceeded on with the next passage in the book. I made sense of it in my own way, but I stopped for a moment to wonder about how much of a philosophy was packed into one simple neat statement there. So it made me wonder, like, what would it take for a person to write down such a line, right? I'll go into the meaning of what that line meant a little later, or maybe I may not touch upon it depending upon the time. But what the point here I wanted to make was it made me reflect back on a literary work that we all know of, right? Poetry. Poetry is all about condensing huge chunks of information or condensing a world of philosophy into very simple lines. That's poetry, right? So it made me feel this line, though it may not sound like it's poetry, it does the exact same thing that poetry does. So I was just wondering about poetry. Then I started researching a little bit more on poetry as after I went back home, and I stumbled upon something very interesting about poetry, the origins of poetry. So poetry began because memory was the only way how knowledge could be transacted to the future generations. Poetry did not necessarily predate writing, but it was popular, or it was made popular in the era when writing was not the norm. Okay, when memorization was the norm, right? And just think about this. There was nothing to write, there were no papers to write, there was no printing press invented back then, but there was a lot of knowledge that humans were accumulating, and they had to remember that knowledge and pass it on to the next generation. And that knowledge is really, really vast, right? It's not so easy to remember everything. So poetry became a tool to condense lots of information into some small packages, right? Into small stanzas, small verses. And the whole world of poetry began, poetics, right? But here, there is also a problem with that. And the problem is that why would students learn? Why would anyone learn poetry? So I accumulated, let us say, 2000, 3000 years back, I have accumulated some knowledge and I have written it in the form of poetry. I want to transact it to the next generation. But why would someone say a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old remember that? First, they don't understand the meaning of what has been written, right? What is the motivation for them? And it was then the art of poetics began, right? You could think of this as something akin to playway method of learning that is very popular today. Poetry needed that rhyme and rhythm because it needed to be a delight to learn, right? No one can grasp the meaning of poetry so quickly, and no one would be motivated to just remember huge chunks of information just for the sake of it. And you cannot tell children very directly. I think we all as educators know that very well. If a child asks, why should I learn this? And if you simply tell, because it's important, because we need to pass it on to the future generations, the child is not motivated to learn that, right? Something more has to be there. The child has to get attracted to it, right? And poetry did that with the help of rhyme and meter, right? So a whole new subject of how to write poetry. There was good poetry, there was bad poetry that made way. And if you think about it, that's the pedagogy, right? That's the early world pedagogy of how knowledge has to be translated, how the knowledge has to be transacted to the next generation. So poetry was one of the earliest forms of pedagogy, I feel. However, this system had its limits because education was limited to those people or those children who had good memory capabilities, right? Who had the ability to memorize things, right? So education was not everybody's cup of tea. Education was not something that everybody could pursue. They need to have that good memory, and more important than that, they need to have the time to be able to sit with it and memorize everything, which many people did not have. So education was of the elite, right? And just so that the knowledge could be remembered, every civilization had its own ways of how to ensure that the knowledge that is being created is preserved. And poetry did that in many ways. In India, we have a tradition called as Ghanapati. Okay, I'm not sure how many of you have heard about it, but Ghanapatis are those people, if you take in Sanskrit verse, okay, something, a simple line, let us say the line has 4 words in it. 4 words would make 16 different combinations, right? 4 factorial is 16, so it can make like 16 different combinations, 24, right? 4 factorial is 24, it can make 24 different combinations. So they would write those 4 words in 24 different combinations and then they would memorize it. The reason being, as the knowledge is being transacted, there is a chance that 1 or 2 words might miss. Okay, but you will be able to rebuild the whole verse because every word has been repeated some n number of times. The grammar is not important here, it's the repetition that was done, right? And anyone who knows grammar could once again recombine those words and make out that shloka or whatever it is, right? So this was a very elaborate system, and you can now begin to understand how difficult it must have been for children to memorize such things, right? We have come a long way from there. Somewhere around 15th and 16th century is when paper and printing press started becoming more popular. Just like how AI is making its waves today, paper and printing technology made its waves in the 15th and 16th centuries. Right, that was today what we consider it as a very humble technology, something that is so simple, something that we don't really think about in our everyday life, but no, back then it was magic. Paper was magic, being able to print was magic. Imagine if you had to print 100 leaflets, could you imagine writing down those 100 leaflets 100 times, right? Printing just automated that, right? You could write it once and you could print it n number of copies, any number of copies that you wanted. And that's when poetry began to lose its sheen. Poetry began to lose its importance. Prose started taking over. Many people, now there was not, for one simple reason, it was not necessary to condense information anymore now because you had access to paper, lots of paper, and you had access to printing technology. You could just write it, right? You could print it any number of times, right? And this allowed, prose is a very big revolution in education, right? Because it allowed so many people to access knowledge. Poetry was not accessible to everyone. You could listen, you could appreciate, just like how around us there will be many people who hum a lot of songs but don't really understand the meaning of it. They hum because it sounds nice. Poetry was like that. Very few people really understood it. Even though common man could hum it, okay, they could not really grasp the meaning of it. But prose broke that barrier. You could easily grasp the meaning of what was being written or what was being spoken, right? So prose suddenly made education accessible to a lot of people. And this was a time just like today, if I connect it back to today, it's very akin to how AI revolution is happening currently. When AI made its way into our life around 3 years, 2 years, 3 years ago when ChatGPT first came out, there were people who were very skeptical about it, and there are still people who are very skeptical about it. There are people who say that it is the old world methods that work. We should not really depend too much on AI and everything. The same thing happened with prose and poetry. Poetry, a lot of poets started saying, because they saw themselves as gatekeepers of knowledge and they couldn't see prose taking over poetry. Prose was dethroning poetry very quickly. It was not something that they expected, it was not something to their liking, and there was this whole army of poets, whole army of people who were in that business of poetry, started protesting against it, calling uh, prose as the work of low intellectuals, people with low intellect, right? So they did that, yeah. And I would not say, here is where I differ a little bit, here is where I would like to actually hear to what those guys have to say about it. They are not entirely wrong when they say poetry is superior to prose, because poetry packs a lot of meaning. Poetry had its very different role in the society back then. Today poetry has a very different role to play. Just because prose took over, poetry did not die. Poetry became an art today. Right? Poetry is something that allows humans to express emotions. Poetry is something that makes you think much more deeper. If I'm hearing a song or if I'm hearing to a poem or anything, I would be able to connect to it in my own way. I would like to go back to the original quote that I talked about, that I said in the beginning, Milan Kundera's quote. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. I understood it in my own way, but as I read that novel, I heard it, I listened to that novel, the author goes on explaining what the meaning of that actually is. Let me not dig deeper into it, but the meaning of it was completely different from how I understood it. I took it very personally, but the author explained it in a very political stance. Both were deep enough. When I reflected about my own thing, I felt like I heard it 15 to 20 times. I understood it in my own way. There was some learning that I had out of it. I thought critically about it. I may not have come to the same conclusion that the author had. Author meant something very different, but when I understood what author meant, it added another deeper layer of meaning to it. Poetry allows you to do that, prose doesn't. Right? When you're reading prose, it is most of the prose is written in a very conclusive manner. Uh, there is hardly any room to make multiple interpretations out of prose. I wouldn't say it's not possible entirely, but not as much as poetry. Poetry allows you to dig deeper into yourself, which prose may or may not. Right? Poetry has its place today in the world. Right? I would like to connect this back to AI once again. Why I'm talking about this, why I'm talking about poetry, why I'm talking about prose, how poetry lost its sheen, but it still did not die. People did not let it die. Right? I think it holds so much of relevance to the pedagogy that we have currently. I would like to call it the old world pedagogy. Okay, don't think of it as something irrelevant today. I'm just calling it as old world pedagogy because much of the pedagogical work that has been done has been possible. If you think about it, pedagogy has been available since the days of Socrates, right? How to teach. Socratic thinking is a pedagogical tool we still use today in our classrooms. Okay, but when poetry was very popular, it was not possible to adopt that Socratic thinking into your everyday classrooms. When prose took over, is when it allowed mind space for educators to bring such pedagogical tools into the classroom, right? Because it's no more about rote memory or memorization. Okay, your mind space has freed up. You don't need to memorize a lot of things. You just need to learn the language and you can read the prose and you can understand it, right? So that's when the world of pedagogy became much more advanced. All the pedagogical tools that we use today, be it zone of proximal development or Socratic thinking or dialogism in the classroom, whatever we are talking about, have developed only after prose became more popular, right? I would call this old world technology because a lot of this is old world pedagogy, old world pedagogy. A lot of this is tried and tested, a lot of this works. I'm not saying this is something that we need to part away with. We should never part away with old world technology, just like how we never parted away from poetry. But is poetry the best way to transact knowledge or to the next generation or transmit knowledge to the next generation? I don't think so. Poetry is not, prose is. Similarly, old world technology, is it the best, is it the only and the best way, old world pedagogy that we are using? Probably not. Okay, I'm not giving any conclusive statements here, but I would just want us to think a little bit more deeper about this, right? What we often hear nowadays is that this has become very popular since around past 5 years, that people now do not have the attention span they used to have once upon a time. Attention span has gone down. People often refer to a study, a research paper. I cannot remember who has done this research exactly, but it talks about how a human's attention span today is less than that of a goldfish. A goldfish can focus for 9 seconds, whereas humans on average are able to do it for 7 seconds. I would want us to think critically about it, right? Just technology grows exponentially, right? Our minds do not. Okay, the way we are, it doesn't change so quickly. If the attention spans what we had earlier, I strongly believe we still have today. I don't think that is true that attention spans have become lower in children. I don't think that is true. The reason I'm saying is, I think we are confusing lower attention spans with something called as distributed attention span. Okay, it's distributed attention. For example, yesterday when I was trying to prepare for my talk today, I'll just tell you what I did in the first 20 minutes. When I sat down in front of my laptop as I was trying to write down what I want to talk about today, I went on to chess.com and I played a 5-minute game of chess. Right? It's 5 minutes for me, 5 minutes for the opponent, so 10 minutes gone there. Because it was a game where one wins and one loses, I spent around 6 minutes playing chess. Then I immediately moved on to YouTube, okay, where I have a list of selected channels that I watch. I don't watch anything random that comes upon, right? So there are a list of selected channels that I put on YouTube. I went there, I watched a couple of science experiment videos from a channel called Science and Fun. Okay, I was a physics teacher, so I'm so much into experiments. I watched a couple of shorts. They were just 30-minute shorts. I watched them very quickly. Around 7-8 minutes are gone, and the next 12 minutes I actually sat down and wrote what I wanted to speak. The next 12 minutes approximately. This is distributed attention, right? I chose my distributed attention. Within 20 minutes, I did 3 different things. Is this going to make me a master in chess, or is this going to make me a master in physics experiments, or is it going to make me a master in writing? No, it is not going to make me that. Something deep focus will only allow me to do that. You know, chess players, they actually forego education. They don't go to schools. They only study chess. Deep focus is needed in order to master something like chess. The same goes for everything. Here, I am not building mastery in these 3 things, but I am building fluency in these 3 things at the same time. Right? I'm not saying this is the best way to go, but I would like to shift our way of thinking. This is distributed attention. 20 minutes, I was focused on 3 different things. Just imagine if you're showing an animated movie to a child, they can watch a 90-minute, 120-minute movie without losing focus. So how can you say that attention spans are getting reduced? No, they are not getting reduced. They are there. Okay. Our pedagogy did not catch up. Right? We did not take into account this phenomenon of distributed attention. I'm not saying it's the best way to go. Some people did it in a very different way. If you look at some old YouTube channels which used to make long format videos on educational content, today a lot of them resorted to making 30-second videos or 1-minute videos in YouTube shorts, because what they say is now the attention spans have gone lower. People are willing to watch shorts. But if you actually look at the data is very clear that shorts definitely are being watched exponentially more than long format videos. But if you go into the nuances of the data, this data is limited to United States, unfortunately. But if you go into the nuances of the data, it very clearly says that there are categories. It is entertainment category where shorts win. Educational category, it's still the long format content ruling the YouTube. It's still the long format content. Okay, and it has actually grown. If you compare it from 2021 to 2023, in the 2 years that the data was available and tested, it has actually grown by a few percentage points. I don't remember how much, but it did grow. So long format content is what people are consuming for education. YouTube has a disproportionate amount of videos on entertainment category, which makes us feel that everyone is watching shorts. No, people who are going to YouTube to watch educational content still prefer long format, right? Today, with the arrival of AI, I just wanted to focus on one thing, which is something that I am doing with my organization, with what I'm working on currently, because I am working on building a student's magazine, a print edition of a magazine, right? If I'm so much talking about in favor of AI and everything, why am I going towards the print edition of it? I wanted to make a point there. I wanted to just dig a little bit deeper before I leave. I strongly feel that just like the analogy that I made between prose and poetry, right? Prose is here to stay and prose is the way forward, right? It has been the way forward since hundreds of years, it will still be. And I don't think we should move back to poetry to transact knowledge. But I would not like to live in a world where there is no poetry. Poetry has to be there, right? Similarly, old world pedagogy, the Socratic thinking or the other things that I mentioned, like zone of proximal development, there is so much of research done on what works here. So when we are moving towards AI, when we are discussing towards AI, let us not leave the old world pedagogy. Right. We have to work together with whatever has already been robustly tried and tested. And what AI can do is it can open up access just like how prose opened up access. Right. AI can open up access. Personalized learning is something that AI can do better. Right. And at the same time, just imagine if you take out an NCERT textbook today, in the English textbook of grade 6 or grade 7, imagine there is a picture of a kitchen. Let us say whatever story that they are saying, it always starts with a picture. And let's say the picture is of a kitchen. In an NCERT textbook, you typically find a kitchen that is very modern. Right? You'd find a kitchen that is modular, what we call it today. Right? But if you go back, but if you think about a child in rural, they cannot connect to that. They don't know, they don't see that kitchen, they don't see kitchen like that in their everyday lives. They will not be able to connect to that. But does that mean that they won't understand it? No, they can understand it, right? They need different contexts in which the knowledge has to be introduced. And if you want humans to do that, it is an uphill task. It's something that we have been trying since decades together to contextualize learning. I'm not saying we'll not be able to do it. We'll just take lots of time, but there's lots of data available. And I think AI can help us contextualize learning much faster, right? And at the same time, personalized learning, like adaptive learning. Okay, there is already a study that has been done which very clearly states that in Andhra Pradesh, because the government has adopted personalized adaptive learning in schools, there has been 1.9x growth in children. That is what AI can do. As a teacher, I will not be able to focus on 40 students at once. My job as a teacher is not to go to each and every individual student and teach them, right? AI might help you do that, right? So I think the point I wanted to make here today is that, am I running out of time? Yeah, sorry, I'll just wrap it up in a minute. A lot of technologies have made their way, right? When invention of radio happened, educationists all over the world said this is a revolution. When video cassette tapes came, they said this is a revolution. When YouTube came, we said this is a revolution. Now today when AI is here, we are saying this is a revolution. I think it is a revolution, but I think we need to pause and think of the best ways to adapt it and not make it just another passing cloud like what happened with radios, what happened with YouTube, what happened with other technologies. They had potential, but I think we did not dig deeper into it properly. I think AI is giving us another chance at that. What we now need is to dig deeper, do our own research. Right. Yeah, with that I would like to end the talk today. Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.